Restaurant manager dragged shy waitress. To bathroom. Unaware, 10 Hell's Angels was standing nearby. The bathroom door slammed behind them, the sound echoing off the cold tile walls. Isla's heart hammered against her ribs as Victor's iron grip held her wrist captive. The small space felt even more suffocating with his towering presence blocking the only exit. "Let me go," she whispered, her voice trembling despite her effort to sound firm. The dim fluorescent light cast shadows across Victor's sharp features, making him look even more menacing. His steel blue eyes locked onto hers, sending a chill down her spine. "You think you can just walk away when I'm speaking to you?" His Russian accent thickened with each word, his breath warm against her face. Isla pressed herself against the sink, trying to create distance between them. The cold porcelain dug into her lower back. I was just doing my job. Please, I need to get back to my tables." Victor's free hand came up to grip her chin, forcing her to maintain eye contact. "Your job?" A cruel smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Your job is to do as I say when I say it. You work in my restaurant now." "This isn't your restaurant," she protested weakly, though uncertainty crept into her voice. How much of the city did this man actually control? His thumb traced her bottom lip, the gentle touch a stark contrast to his bruising grip on her wrist. "Everything in this neighborhood belongs to me, including this establishment." His voice dropped lower, becoming more intimate. "And now, you." Panic clawed at her chest. The bathroom suddenly felt too small, too warm. His cologne, expensive and masculine, filled her senses, making it hard to think clearly. "You can't just claim people like property." Victor's laugh was dark and without humor. "I can do whatever I want, Moya Sledkaya." He leaned closer, his chest nearly touching hers. "And what I want is you." Isla's breath caught in her throat. She could feel the raw power emanating from him, the dangerous energy that made everyone in the restaurant give him a wide berth. Her legs trembled, threatening to give out. "I've been watching you," he continued, his voice hypnotic. "The way you move, the way you try to hide in plain sight. But you can't hide from me, Isla." The sound of her name on his lips made her shiver. How long had he known who she was? How long had she been under his surveillance without realizing it? "Please," she tried again, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're hurting me." His grip on her wrist loosened slightly, but he didn't let go. Instead, his thumb began rubbing small circles on her pulse point, the intimate gesture more frightening than his previous roughness. "I protect what's mine," he murmured, his lips nearly brushing her ear. "And I've decided you're mine now." Before Isla could respond, heavy footsteps echoed from the hallway outside. The bathroom door burst open with a bang that made her jump. Victor didn't even flinch. A group of leather-clad men filled the doorway, their patches identifying them as Hell's Angels. The lead biker's face was thunderous, his hands clenched into fists. But Victor merely turned his head, keeping one hand firmly on Isla. His posture shifted subtly, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. When he spoke, his voice was arctic. "She is mine now." The words hung in the air like icicles. Isla watched as the bikers' expressions changed from anger to uncertainty to fear. They knew who Victor was, what he was capable of. One by one, they backed away from the door. Victor's arm snaked around her waist, pulling her against his side. The message was clear. She belonged to him now, and no one would dare challenge that claim. "Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now, back to the story." The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting harsh shadows across Victor's face as he stared down the Hell's Angels. The bathroom suddenly felt like a cage, with Isla pressed against the cold tile wall, her heart hammering against her ribs. The bikers' leather jackets creaked as they shifted their weight, uncertain how to proceed against the infamous Russian. Victor's presence filled the small space, his broad shoulders blocking the doorway. He didn't move, didn't flinch, just stood there like a statue carved from ice, radiating deadly calm. His earlier words hung in the air. "She is mine now." Simple, direct, a statement that brooked no argument. The leader of the bikers, a burly man with a salt and pepper beard, took a half step forward. "This ain't your territory, Russian." But there was hesitation in his voice, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Victor's lip curled slightly. Territory? The word rolled off his tongue, thick with his accent. "You mistake me for someone who negotiates." His hand slid casually into his jacket pocket, and the subtle movement made several of the bikers tense. Isla watched, frozen, as the air grew heavy with unspoken threats. Her uniform felt damp with cold sweat, and she could hear her own shallow breathing in the tense silence. The fluorescent light continued its annoying dance, on, off, making the scene feel surreal. The biker leader's eyes darted between Victor and Isla, then to his men. After what felt like an eternity, he stepped back. "We're leaving." He jerked his head toward the exit, and his men followed, their boots heavy on the restaurant floor. Victor remained motionless until the last echo of their footsteps faded. Only then did he turn to Isla, his dark eyes boring into her. She felt stripped bare under that gaze, exposed in ways that had nothing to do with physical nakedness. The night stretched on, each minute feeling like an hour. Isla moved through her remaining duties in a daze, dropping a glass and mixing up orders. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Victor had returned to his table, but she felt his eyes following her every movement. When her shift finally ended, Isla practically ran to the back door, fumbling with her purse. The cool night air hit her face as she stepped outside, promising escape, freedom, normal life. But Victor was there, materializing from the shadows like a nightmare made flesh. His tall figure blocked her path to the parking lot, and Isla's steps faltered. "Going somewhere?" His voice was soft, almost gentle, but it carried an edge that made her shiver. I need to go home," she managed to say, hating how her voice trembled. Victor moved closer, and Isla found herself backing up until she hit the brick wall. He placed one hand beside her head, leaning in until she could smell his expensive cologne mixed with something darker, dangerous. "You won't get away that easily," he said, his other hand finding her arm. His grip was surprisingly gentle, but she knew better than to mistake it for weakness. He guided her away from the wall, toward her car, his touch both a caress and a command. Isla's world tilted on its axis. Everything she had known, her quiet life, her careful routines, her plans for the future, seemed to dissolve under Victor's touch. The parking lot lights cast long shadows across the asphalt, and somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. It felt like a warning, like the last cry of her old life slipping away into the darkness. Sunlight filtered through Isla's thin curtains, but she hadn't slept more than a few restless hours. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Victor's intimidating figure, felt his iron grip on her wrist, heard his cold voice claiming her as his possession. Her alarm buzzed, making her jump. Another day at the restaurant awaited, whether she was ready or not. Her hands trembled as she got dressed, fumbling with the buttons of her white uniform shirt. The bruise on her wrist had darkened overnight, a purple reminder of last night's encounter. She covered it with her watch band, trying to forget how easily Victor had overpowered her. The morning commute felt different. Every shadow seemed deeper, every stranger's glance more threatening. Isla caught herself checking her rearview mirror more often than usual, half expecting to see a black SUV following her. The restaurant's back entrance felt like a sanctuary, familiar and safe. But as she pushed through the heavy door, something felt off. The hair on the back of her neck stood up, and she couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. "Morning, Isla," Marco, the line cook, called out cheerfully from the kitchen. She managed a weak smile, grateful for the normalcy of his greeting. She began her opening routine, wiping down tables, arranging place settings, filling salt shakers. Simple tasks that usually brought her comfort now felt like she was going through the motions in someone else's life. Her fingers trembled slightly as she folded cloth napkins into perfect triangles. "You okay?" Sarah, another waitress, touched her shoulder. "You look pale." "Just tired," Isla lied, forcing herself to appear calm. "Didn't sleep well." The morning dragged on as customers started trickling in for early lunch. Isla moved between tables, taking orders, delivering plates, but her mind kept drifting to the bathroom incident. The way Victor had looked at her, like she was something to be claimed, consumed. She dropped a water glass, the crash making her jump. Sorry, she muttered, quickly cleaning up the mess. Her cheeks burned as she felt eyes on her from every direction. Was she being paranoid, or were there more suited men in the restaurant than usual? She couldn't tell anymore if the people watching her were Victor's men or just regular customers. The lunch rush picked up, and Isla threw herself into work, hoping the familiar rhythm would drown out her anxiety. But every time the door chimed, her heart skipped a beat. Every dark-suited customer made her pulse race until she confirmed it wasn't him. She was delivering a tray of drinks to a corner table when the atmosphere in the restaurant shifted. The usual lunch chatter dimmed, replaced by a heavy silence that rolled through the room like a cold wave. Isla didn't need to turn around to know what had caused it. Her hands gripped the serving tray tighter, knuckles turning white. When she finally gathered the courage to look, Victor was there, commanding attention without saying a word. Two men flanked him as he moved to a corner booth, his movements fluid and predatory. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than she made in 6 months, his presence both elegant and threatening. His ice blue eyes found her immediately, as if he'd known exactly where she would be. The intensity of his gaze pinned her in place, making her feel exposed despite the crowded restaurant. His finger lifted slightly from the table, beckoning her over with the smallest of gestures. Isla's throat went dry. Her feet felt leaden as she set down her serving tray with trembling hands. Every step toward his table felt like walking through deep water, her movements slow and resistant. The distance between them seemed to stretch endlessly, yet shrink too quickly at the same time. The closer she got, the more she could feel the raw power emanating from him. His men watched her approach with blank expressions, but Victor's eyes never left hers, unblinking and hungry. The leather booth creaked as Victor's massive frame shifted to make room. "Sit," he commanded, his accent thick and rich like honey mixed with gravel. His dark eyes pierced through Isla, sending shivers down her spine. Isla's hands trembled as she slid into the booth beside him, hyper-aware of the heat radiating from his body. The restaurant's usual bustle seemed to fade away, leaving only the thundering of her heart in her ears. "What time do you finish work today?" Victor's question caught her off guard. His voice was softer than before, but no less commanding. I'm done at 9, she whispered, her throat dry. She could feel his men watching from across the table, their faces impassive. Victor's fingers drummed against the polished wood table. "You work too hard," he observed, his eyes scanning her face. "Always here, always serving others." There was something in his tone, disapproval perhaps, or possession. "It's my job," Isla managed, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I need the money." A low chuckle rumbled in Victor's chest. "Money?" He reached for his water glass, his sleeve pulling back to reveal an expensive watch that probably cost more than she made in a year. "There are easier ways to make money, Malishka." The Russian word rolled off his tongue, and though Isla didn't understand its meaning, the intimacy of it made her cheeks flush. She shifted uncomfortably, very aware of how close he sat, how his thigh nearly touched hers. "I should get back to work," she said, starting to rise, but Victor's hand landed on her knee under the table. Not gripping, not hurting, just resting there, heavy and warm through her uniform skirt. "Stay," he said. It wasn't a request. "Tell me about yourself, Isla Sullivan." Her breath caught in her throat. She hadn't told him her last name. "There's nothing to tell." "I disagree." His thumb traced a small circle on her knee. "You live alone in that small apartment on Mason Street. No family visits, no close friends. You work doubles whenever they're offered. You dream of having your own restaurant someday." Each word hit like a physical blow. He'd been watching her, studying her life like she was prey. The realization made her dizzy. "How do you—" "I make it my business to know everything about what interests me." His hand moved from her knee, and he reached for something in his jacket. "And you, Malishka, interest me very much." Two of his men suddenly stood, creating a wall between their booth and the rest of the restaurant. Isla's heart rate spiked, but Victor's movements remained calm, deliberate. He withdrew a sleek business card from his jacket pocket. The card was heavy in her hand when he pressed it into her palm, the paper thick and expensive. His name was embossed in silver letters, along with a phone number. Nothing else. "Meet me tomorrow night," Victor said, his voice leaving no room for refusal. "I'll send a car." Isla stared at the card, her stomach twisting into knots. She wanted to say no, to throw the card back at him and run. But fear and something else, a dangerous curiosity she didn't want to acknowledge, kept her frozen in place. The weight of his expectation hung in the air between them, as tangible as the hand that had rested on her knee moments before. The city lights blurred past the window, as Isla sat rigid in the back of the sleek black car. Her hands twisted nervously in her lap, still wearing her waitress uniform from her shift. The leather seats felt too luxurious, too foreign against her skin. The driver hadn't said a word since opening her door, his eyes fixed straight ahead as they wove through traffic. Her heart wouldn't stop, racing. Victor's business card felt like it was burning a hole in her pocket. Stark white cardstock with just a phone number embossed in black. No name, no title. She hadn't called it, hadn't needed to. The car had appeared exactly as he said it would, right as her shift ended. "How much longer?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The driver's eyes flicked to the rear-view mirror. 5 minutes, Miss Sullivan." She startled at the use of her name. Of course they knew who she was. Victor seemed to know everything. The thought made her shiver despite the warm evening air flowing through the car's vents. The streets grew wider, cleaner, more polished as they entered the wealthy district. Designer boutiques and high-end restaurants lined the sidewalks. Women in cocktail dresses tottered between bars on sky-high heels. Men in tailored suits conducted business over cigars and whiskey on restaurant patios. This wasn't her world. She belonged in her small apartment above the Chinese takeout place, with its temperamental heating and water-stained ceiling. She belonged in sensible shoes and a practical uniform, counting tips at the end of each shift. The car slowed to a stop in front of a building with no sign, just a black door and a stern-faced bouncer. The driver opened her door, offering his hand. Isla hesitated before taking it, her legs shaky as she stepped onto the sidewalk. Music thrummed through the walls, a deep bass she could feel in her chest. The bouncer nodded once and opened the door without a word. The driver gestured for her to enter. Inside, the club was all dark wood and crimson velvet, crystal chandeliers casting warm light over intimate seating areas. The air smelled of expensive cigars and leather. A jazz quartet played on a small stage, the singer's sultry voice wrapping around each note like silk. Heads turned as she walked in, women draped in diamonds, men in suits worth more than she made in a year. Their eyes lingered on her uniform, her practical shoes, her obvious displacement in their world of wealth and power. But it was Victor's gaze that hit her hardest. He sat in a corner booth elevated above the main floor, a king on his throne. His men formed a protective circle around him, their faces impassive, but their eyes alert. A half-empty glass of amber liquid sat before him, ice slowly melting. He wore a black suit that fit him perfectly, his dark hair styled back from his face. The lights caught the sharp angles of his jaw, the dangerous glint in his eyes as they locked onto her. His presence filled the space, demanding attention, commanding respect. Victor's hand rose in a lazy gesture, beckoning her forward. Isla's feet moved of their own accord, drawn to him like a moth to flame. The plush carpet muffled her steps as she climbed the few stairs to his elevated section. The closer she got, the more her skin prickled with awareness. His men parted silently to let her through, their faces betraying nothing. The booth curved in a semicircle, the leather upholstery gleaming in the low light. Victor sat dead center, his arms stretched across the back of the seat in casual dominance. He patted the space next to him, a clear command in the simple gesture. Isla's breath caught in her throat. The air felt thick with tension, charged with something dangerous and electric. This close, she could smell his cologne, something expensive and masculine that made her head spin slightly. The bass from the club's music thrummed through Isla's bones as Victor shifted closer, his presence overwhelming her senses. The leather of the booth creaked beneath them, and the scent of his expensive cologne mixed with the sharp bite of whiskey on his breath. "Tell me about yourself," Victor said, his accent thicker in the intimate space between them. His steel-blue eyes fixed on her face, studying every micro-expression. "What drives you, Isla?" She gripped her hands together under the table, trying to steady their trembling. "There's not much to tell," she answered, her voice barely above a whisper. "I disagree." His tone left no room for argument. "A woman who works as hard as you do must have dreams." The truth slipped out before she could stop it. "I want to open my own restaurant someday." Victor's eyebrows lifted slightly, genuine interest flickering across his features. "And what's stopping you?" "Money," Isla admitted, then quickly added, "and experience." He leaned back, one arm stretched across the booth behind her shoulders. Though he didn't touch her, she felt the heat radiating from him. His men stood at attention nearby, their dark suits blending into the shadows of the dimly lit club. "Experience comes with time," Victor mused. "But money?" He let the word hang between them, heavy with implication. Isla's stomach clenched. "I'll earn it myself." A low chuckle rumbled from his chest. So proud. so determined. His eyes roamed her face. "Tell me more about this restaurant of yours." Despite her fear, something in his genuine curiosity made her continue. "Something small, intimate, where people feel at home, but the food is exceptional." She found herself warming to the topic. "I learned to cook from my mother. Before she—" Victor's expression shifted, almost imperceptibly. "Before she what?" "She died. Both my parents did. Car accident." Isla swallowed hard, shocked at herself for sharing something so personal with this dangerous man. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the muffled music and distant conversations. Victor's jaw tightened, and something dark passed behind his eyes. "Loss," he said finally, "shapes us all." The weight of his words suggested personal experience, but Isla didn't dare ask. Instead, she stared at her hands, aware of how close he was, how easily he could reach out and touch her. One of his men approached with a bottle of wine, expensive by the look of it. Victor took it, dismissing him with a slight nod. He poured 2 glasses with practiced ease. "To new beginnings," he said, lifting one glass and holding the other out to her. Isla hesitated, but his unwavering stare told her refusing wasn't an option. As she reached for the glass, his fingers brushed against hers deliberately. The contact sent electricity through her arm, and she nearly dropped the delicate stemware. His touch lingered, warm and certain, before slowly pulling away. Her heart thundered in her chest as she fought the urge to snatch her hand back. When she looked up, she caught a glimpse of something softer in his expression, a crack in his usual icy demeanor. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the calculating look she'd grown to expect from him. The click of Isla's heels echoed through the empty hallway of her apartment building. Her hands trembled as she dug through her purse for her keys, the events of the evening still fresh in her mind. The wine Victor had insisted she drink left a lingering warmth in her chest, but it did nothing to calm her nerves. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his intense stare, felt the brush of his fingers against hers. The way he'd asked about her life, her dreams, as if he actually cared. But she knew better. Men like Victor didn't care. They possessed, they controlled, they destroyed. The key scraped against the lock as she tried to steady her shaking hands. The hallway felt smaller suddenly, the air thicker. Before she could turn the key, a deep voice cut through the silence. "Let me help you with that." Isla's breath caught in her throat. She spun around, her back pressing against the door. Victor stood there, his broad shoulders filling the narrow hallway. He'd followed her home. Of course he had. "How did you—" she started, but the words died in her throat. "I always know where my interests are." His voice was smooth, dangerous. He took a step closer, and Isla pressed herself harder against the door. "I'm not your interest," she managed to say, though her voice wavered. "I'm nobody's interest." Victor's laugh was low, almost gentle. Almost. "You still don't understand, do you?" He moved closer, placing one hand on the door beside her head. "From the moment I saw you in that restaurant, you became mine." The scent of his cologne, expensive and masculine, wrapped around her. His proximity made her head spin, and she couldn't tell if it was fear or something else entirely that made her heart race. "I don't belong to anyone," she whispered, but the words lacked conviction. His other hand came up, fingers ghosting along her jawline. Isla flinched, but didn't pull away. Couldn't pull away. His touch was surprisingly gentle, at odds with everything she knew about him. "Such spirit," he murmured, his accent thicker now. "Even when you're trembling, you still fight." His thumb traced her bottom lip, and Isla's breath hitched. "That's why I want you." The words snapped her out of her trance. She jerked her head away from his touch, anger flaring through her fear. "Want me? You don't even know me." "I know enough." His eyes darkened. "I know you work too hard for too little. I know you dream of your own restaurant but think it's impossible. I know you're alone in this city, trying to prove something to yourself." Each word hit like a physical blow. How had he learned so much about her in one evening? What else did he know? "Stop it," she said, her voice stronger now. "Whatever game you're playing." "This isn't a game, Isla." The way he said her name made her shiver. "Games are for children. What I want is very real." She gathered every ounce of courage she had, lifted her chin, and met his gaze directly. "I will never be yours." Victor's lips curled into that dangerous smile she was beginning to recognize. Something dark and hungry flickered in his eyes as he leaned in closer, his breath warm against her ear. "We'll see about that." Isla fumbled behind her for the doorknob, twisted it, and practically fell backward into her apartment. She slammed the door shut, his words hanging in the air like smoke, impossible to escape. The lunch rush had just begun when they walked in. 5 men with hard eyes and leather jackets. Isla's hands trembled as she carried plates to table 6, recognizing their colors as belonging to the Snake Kings, one of the city's most notorious gangs. The restaurant fell quiet, conversations dying as the men sprawled across 2 tables near the bar. "Get Victor on the phone," she heard Marcus, the manager, whisper urgently to someone in the kitchen. Her stomach clenched. Of course they'd call him. This was his territory after all. The gang members ordered beer and shots, their voices getting louder with each round. Isla tried to stay in the back, but there weren't enough servers to avoid them completely. Every time she passed their table, crude comments and wandering hands followed. "Hey, sweetheart, why don't you take a break and sit with us?" one of them called out, grabbing for her apron strings. She jerked away, nearly dropping her tray of drinks. The front door opened, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. Victor strode in, flanked by 4 of his men. His icy gaze swept the restaurant before landing on the Snake Kings. Without a word, he walked to their table. "You're in the wrong place," Victor said, his voice carrying clearly despite its softness. The threat in his tone made Isla's skin prickle. The gang's leader stood, swaying slightly from the alcohol. "Public place, ain't it? We can drink wherever we want." Victor's movement was so fast, Isla almost missed it. One moment he was standing still. The next he had the man's face pressed against the table, arm twisted behind his back. The other gang members jumped up, but Victor's men already had weapons trained on them. "I won't repeat myself," Victor said, increasing pressure until the man yelped. "This establishment is under my protection. You have 30 seconds to leave before I demonstrate exactly what that means." He released the leader, who stumbled back, face red with rage and humiliation. For a tense moment, Isla thought they might fight anyway, but self-preservation won out. The Snake Kings filed out, throwing dark looks over their shoulders. As soon as they left, Victor's eyes found Isla. She tried to retreat to the kitchen, but his long strides ate up the distance between them. His hand closed around her wrist, pulling her toward the back office. The small room felt even smaller with Victor's presence filling it. He backed her against the desk, caging her in with his arms. This close, she could smell his cologne, something expensive and masculine that made her head spin. "Did they touch you?" he demanded, his accent thicker with anger. Isla shook her head, though her skin still crawled from their attempts. I'm fine." "You're shaking." His thumb brushed over her pulse point, sending sparks up her arm. "It was scary," she admitted, "but you handled it." "This is what my world is like, Isla." His other hand came up to grip her chin, forcing her to meet his gaze. Every day there are threats. Every day there are enemies testing boundaries. The only way to survive is through strength and control. She tried to look away but couldn't break his hold. I never asked to be part of your world. But you are now. His grip tightened fractionally. This is my world, he warned, his voice dark and dangerous. You'll either be part of it or be crushed by it. Isla trembled at his words, the reality of the situation settling in. She was trapped in Victor's orbit now, pulled in by forces beyond her control, and the scariest part was how part of her didn't want to escape. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead as Isla wiped down the last table. Her hands trembled slightly, aware of the two suited men positioned near the entrance. They hadn't moved for hours, their presence a constant reminder of her new reality. Victor's men, watchdogs assigned to guard her every movement. She tried focusing on her closing duties, but their eyes followed her everywhere. One was tall and broad-shouldered, with a scar running down his neck. The other was shorter, but no less intimidating, his stance rigid and alert. They weren't subtle about their surveillance, and it made her skin crawl. I can close up on my own, Isla said, her voice barely above a whisper. Neither man responded. They simply stood there, dark sentinels in the dimly lit restaurant. The kitchen staff had left an hour ago, leaving dirty dishes piled in the sink. Isla moved mechanically through her tasks, the clinking of plates and glasses echoing in the empty space. Every few minutes, she'd catch one of the men shifting position, adjusting their stance to keep her in view. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a text from Victor. My men will escort you home. It wasn't a request. Isla's fingers clenched around the device. She'd tried ignoring his messages earlier, but they kept coming, each one more insistent than the last. The weight of his attention pressed down on her like a physical thing. After finishing the dishes, she gathered her belongings from the staff room. Her regular routine felt foreign now, tainted by this unwanted supervision. She pulled on her jacket, checking her phone again. 3 missed calls from Victor. The cool night air hit her face as she stepped outside. The shorter guard locked the restaurant door while the other scanned the street. They flanked her as she walked, keeping a precise distance, close enough to protect, far enough not to crowd. The city streets were quieter than usual, the occasional car passing by casting long shadows. Isla hugged herself tighter, trying to ignore the sound of footsteps behind her. Her apartment was only 5 blocks away, but tonight it felt like miles. A figure emerged from an alley ahead, stumbling slightly. The man's clothes were disheveled, his movements erratic. He spotted Isla and changed direction, heading straight for her with purpose. Hey, beautiful, he slurred, reaching for her arm. Need some company? Before Isla could step back, Victor's men moved with startling speed. The taller one grabbed the drunk man's wrist, twisting it sharply. The shorter guard appeared on the other side, his presence menacing. Wrong choice, a familiar voice cut through the darkness. Victor stepped out from the shadows, his expensive suit a stark contrast to the grimy street. His eyes were cold as he watched his men handle the situation. The drunk man's face went pale with recognition. He stammered an apology, trying to pull away. Victor's men released him with a rough shove, and he scrambled away into the night. Isla stood frozen, her heart hammering in her chest. Victor moved closer, his presence filling her senses. He smelled of expensive cologne and danger, a combination that made her head spin. You're not alone, Victor said, his voice softer than usual, but still carrying that edge of command. His eyes searched her face, looking for signs of distress. Despite her fear, something in his gaze made her breath catch. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, so close now that she could see the subtle patterns in his tie. His men maintained their positions, creating a protective circle around them both. The streetlights cast shadows across Victor's sharp features, making him look both beautiful and terrifying. The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken threats and promises. Isla stood her ground, even as every instinct screamed at her to run. But she knew now. There was nowhere to run where Victor wouldn't find her. The soft glow of streetlights cast long shadows as Isla locked up the restaurant. Her hands trembled slightly as she turned the key, aware of the dark SUV parked across the street. Victor's men had been watching her every move for days now, their presence both unsettling and oddly comforting. She pulled her coat tighter, around herself, fighting against the evening chill. The weight of Victor's protection pressed down on her like a heavy blanket, suffocating yet warm. Two of his men emerged from the SUV, keeping a respectful distance as they followed her home. Her thoughts drifted to Victor as she walked, the way his ice-blue eyes softened when he looked at her. How his touch, though commanding, held a gentleness she couldn't ignore. She hated herself for noticing these things, for feeling drawn to a man who represented everything she should fear. The click of her heels echoed off empty buildings. A group of men lounged against a wall ahead, their laughter carrying through the night air. Isla's pulse quickened, but Victor's men moved closer, their presence deterring any trouble before it could start. Back in her apartment, Isla sank onto her couch, exhausted. Her phone buzzed, a text from Victor. Her heart skipped as she read his invitation to dinner at his mansion tomorrow night. Private dinner, just the two of them. She typed and deleted several responses before simply replying, "Yes." The next evening, a sleek black car arrived precisely at 7. The driver, Anton, one of Victor's most trusted men, held the door open with a slight bow. The drive through the city's wealthiest district took her past iron gates and manicured lawns until they reached Victor's estate. The mansion stood imposing against the darkening sky, all sharp angles and gleaming windows. Victor waited at the top of the marble steps, his usual dark suit impeccably tailored. Something in his expression changed when he saw her, a softening around his eyes that made her breath catch. "Isla," he said her name like a caress, extending his hand to help her up the steps. "You look beautiful tonight." The dining room was intimate despite its size, candlelight dancing across crystal and silver. Victor pulled out her chair, his fingers brushing her shoulder as she sat. The touch sent electricity through her body. "I want you to know me," Victor said quietly as they began their meal. "Not the man everyone fears, but who I truly am." His voice dropped lower as he spoke about his childhood in Russia, growing up in a world of violence and power. He told her about his father's death, about taking control of the family business at 19. But it was when he mentioned his late wife that his mask truly cracked. "Katerina," he said her name with such raw pain that Isla's heart ached. "She was killed 5 years ago. A rival family's attempt to weaken me." Isla watched as Victor's hands tightened around his wine glass, his knuckles white. "I became the monster they called me after that, the beast. I embraced it because feeling nothing was better than feeling everything." His vulnerability struck her deeply. This was the real Victor, not the cold mafia boss who commanded fear and respect, but a man shaped by loss and duty. A man who had buried his heart beneath layers of ice to survive. "Until you," he added softly, his eyes meeting hers across the table. "You make me feel everything I've tried to forget." The confession hung between them, heavy with meaning. Isla saw the conflict in his expression, the battle between the man he'd become and the one he might be. Her hand moved across the table of its own accord, her fingers brushing his. Victor stilled at her touch, his eyes darkening with an emotion she couldn't name. In that moment, the lines between captor and captive, between fear and attraction, blurred beyond recognition. The crystal glasses clinked softly as Victor poured more wine, the deep red liquid catching the warm light of the dining room chandelier. Isla watched his movements, precise and controlled, like everything else about him. The mansion's elegant dining room felt both overwhelming and intimate. Dark wood panels lined the walls, and expensive artwork hung in gilded frames. But the table was set just for two. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached for her glass. The evening had shifted something between them. Victor's revelations about his past, the loss of his parents at a young age, his rise through the ranks of the organization, the betrayals that had shaped him, had painted a different picture of the man she'd been so afraid of. "You're quiet," Victor observed, his accent thicker than usual. Perhaps it was the wine, or maybe the weight of the memories he'd shared. "I'm processing," Isla admitted, meeting his gaze across the table. "You've never told anyone these things before, have you?" Victor's jaw tightened. "No." He stood suddenly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. Isla's heart jumped, but she remained seated as he walked around the table, his footsteps echoing in the vast room. He stopped beside her chair, and she had to tilt her head back to look up at him. "Stand up," he commanded softly. Isla hesitated for a moment before complying. As she rose, Victor's hand found her waist, steadying her. The touch sent electricity through her body, and she fought the urge to step away. His cologne filled her senses, expensive and masculine, with notes of leather and cedar. "Why me?" she whispered, voicing the question that had been haunting her since that first night in the restaurant bathroom. "Why tell me these things?" Victor's other hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. His touch was surprisingly gentle for hands she knew were capable of violence. "Because you see me," he said, his voice rough. "Not the beast, not the boss. You see past all that." The intensity in his steel-gray eyes made her breath catch. Isla could feel the heat radiating off his body, seeping through her black dress where his hand rested on her waist. The wine hummed in her veins, making everything feel slightly dreamlike. "Victor," she started, but the words died in her throat as he pulled her closer. Time seemed to slow as he leaned in, his intention clear in every line of his body. Isla's heart thundered in her chest, but she didn't move away. His lips met hers with surprising gentleness, a stark contrast to his usual forceful nature. The kiss was soft at first, almost questioning, but when she didn't pull away, it changed. Victor's hand slid from her face to the back of her neck, tangling in her hair as he deepened the kiss. His other arm wrapped fully around her waist, pressing her against him. Heat flooded through her body as his tongue traced her bottom lip, demanding entrance. She gasped, and he took advantage, turning the kiss into something fierce and hungry. Isla's hands found their way to his chest, feeling the solid muscle beneath his expensive shirt. The world narrowed to just this, the taste of wine on his tongue, the strength of his arms around her, the way her body seemed to melt into his. But reality crashed back in like a bucket of cold water. This was Victor Rurikov, the beast, a man who killed without hesitation. A man whose world was violence and power. A man who had forced his way into her life and refused to let her go. She pulled away abruptly, breaking the kiss. Her chest heaved as she stared up at him, her lips tingling, her mind spinning. Victor's expression was unreadable, but something flickered in his eyes, something vulnerable and raw that disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. They stood there, frozen in the moment, neither moving away, but neither moving closer. The only sound was their heavy breathing and the distant ticking of an antique clock. The dining room fell silent as Victor stared into his glass of whiskey, the amber liquid catching the light from the crystal chandelier above. Isla watched him from across the ornate table, her own wine untouched. The massive dining room, with its dark wooden panels and oil paintings, seemed to shrink around them. "Katya," Victor said, his voice rough with emotion. That was her name. His fingers tightened around the glass. "We were married for 3 years before." He trailed off, jaw clenching. Isla's breath caught in her throat. The fearsome man before her suddenly looked vulnerable, human. His shoulders, usually squared with confidence, slumped slightly. "It was my fault," he continued, his accent thickening with each word. "I made enemies, many enemies, and they—" He took a long drink, eyes distant. "They found her when I wasn't there." Isla's hand trembled as she reached for her wine glass, her heart aching at the raw pain in his voice. The restaurant, her normal life, seemed far away now. "I hunted them down," Victor said, his voice turning cold. "Every single one, but it didn't bring her back." He looked up at Isla, his blue eyes intense. "That's when I became what they call me now, the Beast." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. Isla could see the years of guilt and rage etched into the lines of his face, the weight of loss in his shoulders. "You didn't kill her," Isla said softly, surprising herself. "The people who hurt her did." Victor's head snapped up, his eyes widening slightly. No one had ever dared to speak to him about Katya, let alone offer comfort. The muscle in his jaw worked as he processed her words. "I should have protected her," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I promised her I would always keep her safe." His hand shook as he set down his glass. Isla felt tears prick at her eyes. The notorious crime boss, the man who struck fear into the hearts of hardened criminals, was showing her his deepest wound. The restaurant incident, his possessive behavior. It all made sense now. He was terrified of history repeating itself. "Is that why you—" Isla hesitated, gathering her courage. "Why you're so protective of me?" Victor's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "At first, yes," he admitted. "But now—" He reached across the table, his large hand covering hers. His touch was gentle, almost tentative, as if he expected her to pull away. "You're different, Isla. You see me. Not the beast, not the boss. Just me." The warmth of his hand sent tingles up her arm. Isla found herself unable to look away from his intense gaze, caught in the vulnerability of the moment. This wasn't the same man who had dragged her into that bathroom, who had terrorized the Hell's Angels. This was someone else entirely, someone broken, someone human. "You're the only one who's seen this side of me," he said quietly, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. The simple gesture held more intimacy than any kiss could have. Isla felt something shift inside her, a wall crumbling. The connection between them deepened, transcending the physical attraction she'd been fighting. For the first time, she saw past the monster everyone feared to the man beneath, a man capable of deep love and devastating loss. The chandelier cast a warm glow across Victor's private study, where Isla sat perched on the edge of a leather armchair. Her fingers traced the rim of her wine glass, the rich burgundy liquid untouched. Victor stood by the fireplace, his broad shoulders tensed beneath his tailored suit jacket. The crackling flames created dancing shadows across his face, making his features appear even more striking. "You're quiet tonight," he observed, his accent thicker than usual. He turned to face her, and the intensity of his gaze made her breath catch. Isla's heart hammered against her ribs. "I'm always quiet," she managed to say, trying to maintain her composure. Victor's lips curved into a subtle smile. He crossed the room with deliberate steps, each one bringing him closer until he stood directly in front of her. "No," he said softly. "You're thinking. I can see it in your eyes." She set down her wine glass, afraid her trembling hands would betray her. The proximity between them felt electric, charged with unspoken desire. His cologne, rich and masculine, filled her senses. "Tell me what's on your mind," he commanded, but his tone held an unusual gentleness. Isla looked up at him, finding herself drawn into those steel-gray eyes. Whatever this is between us, it's dangerous." Victor reached down, his fingers grazing her cheek. The touch sent shivers down her spine. "Everything about me is dangerous, moja krasivaya. My beautiful one." His thumb traced her bottom lip, and Isla's breath hitched. The tender gesture contrasted sharply with everything she knew about him, the ruthless mafia boss, the man they called the Beast. Yet here he was, touching her as if she were made of glass. "Stand up," he whispered, his voice rough with need. Isla obeyed without thinking, rising to her feet. The movement brought their bodies close, the heat between them undeniable. Victor's hand slid to her waist, pulling her against him. His touch was firm but careful, as if he was holding himself back. "You make me forget who I am," he confessed, his words barely audible. "When I'm with you, I want things I shouldn't want." "What things?" Isla asked, her voice trembling. His other hand tangled in her hair, tilting her face up to his. "Peace," he said. "Redemption." His eyes darkened with desire. "You." The tension between them reached a breaking point. Victor's control snapped, and he captured her lips with his. The kiss was devastating in its intensity, passionate and demanding, yet somehow still tender. His hands roamed her body, claiming every inch of her, marking her as his. Isla melted into him, unable to resist the magnetic pull between them. Her fingers clutched at his shoulders, drawing him closer. The kiss deepened, and she lost herself in the sensation of his mouth on hers, his hands setting her skin on fire through her clothes. A small voice in the back of her mind warned her that she was falling too deep, losing herself in this dangerous man who could destroy her with a single word. But as Victor's kiss grew more urgent, more possessive, that voice grew fainter and fainter. His hands gripped her hips, pulling her flush against him. The hard planes of his body pressed against her softer curves, and a soft moan escaped her lips. Victor growled in response, the sound primal and hungry. Time seemed to stop, the world narrowing down to just the two of them, the dangerous mafia boss and the shy waitress, locked in an embrace that defied all reason. The heat between them built to an inferno, threatening to consume them both. But even as Isla surrendered to the passion, a part of her wondered if she was losing more than just her control. In Victor's arms, she was losing herself, piece by piece, to a man who lived in shadows and dealt in death. The mahogany-lined study felt smaller than usual as Isla perched on the edge of a leather armchair, her fingers tracing the worn edges. Victor stood by the window, his broad shoulders blocking out the city lights behind him. The space between them crackled with unspoken tension. "Do you know why I brought you here tonight?" Victor's voice was low, dangerous. He turned, his dark eyes finding hers in the dim light. Isla's throat went dry. "To talk business?" She tried to keep her voice steady, but it wavered. A ghost of a smile touched his lips as he moved toward her, each step deliberate. "No, Isla, not business." He stopped in front of her chair, close enough that she could smell his expensive cologne. "You've been fighting this, fighting us, since that first night in the bathroom." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "There is no us, Victor. Look at me." It wasn't a request. When she met his gaze, his eyes were intense, almost predatory. "You belong to me. Whether you want to admit it or not, whether you fight it or not, you're mine." The possessiveness in his voice sent shivers down her spine. "I don't belong to anyone," she whispered, but the words lacked conviction. Victor leaned down, his hands gripping the arms of her chair, caging her in. "Your body says otherwise, the way you respond when I'm near." His fingers brushed her cheek, and she couldn't help but lean into his touch. "The way you're trembling right now." Isla's breath caught in her throat. He was right. She was trembling, but not from fear. The heat of his body so close to hers made it hard to think straight. "Tell me to stop," he murmured, his lips inches from hers. "Tell me you don't want this." She opened her mouth to protest, but no words came out. Instead, she found herself staring at his lips, remembering their previous kisses, how they made her feel alive and terrified all at once. Victor's thumb traced her bottom lip. "Your silence speaks volumes, moja krasavica." He switched to Russian, his accent thicker with desire. "I've given you time. I've been patient, but I'm done waiting." Isla's hands fisted in her lap. "What if I'm not ready?" "You are." His certainty was maddening. "You're just afraid. Afraid of wanting someone like me. Afraid of what it means." His fingers slid into her hair, tilting her face up. "Stop thinking so much." The tension between them was unbearable. Every point where their bodies touched felt electric. Victor's presence surrounded her, intoxicating and overwhelming. His other hand moved to her waist, pulling her to her feet. "I see how you watch me," he continued, his voice rougher now. "How your breath catches when I enter a room, how your pulse races when I touch you." As if to prove his point, his fingers found her neck, feeling her racing heartbeat. Isla couldn't deny it anymore. The attraction between them was magnetic, pulling her in despite all her reservations. His touch set her skin on fire, made her forget all the reasons why this was dangerous. Victor's lips brushed against her ear. "Give in to me, Isla. Let me show you what it means to be mine." Her resolve crumbled. With a soft gasp, she pressed closer to him, her hands gripping his shirt. His eyes darkened with triumph as she tilted her face up to his. "Yes," she breathed, barely audible. Victor's control snapped. He captured her lips in a searing kiss, one hand tangling in her hair while the other pulled her flush against him. Isla melted into him, finally surrendering to the chemistry that had been building between them for weeks. She knew she was crossing a line, stepping into his dangerous world willingly, but as his kiss deepened, as his hands claimed her body with possessive touches, she couldn't bring herself to care. She kissed him back with equal fervor, letting her walls crumble completely. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Victor's study, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors. Isla sat rigidly in one of the leather armchairs, her fingers clutching a delicate teacup that had long gone cold. The tension in the room was suffocating as Victor paced behind his massive desk, his jaw clenched tight, phone pressed to his ear. "Find him," Victor growled into the phone, his voice carrying an edge that made Isla's skin crawl. "Now!" The sound of the phone being slammed onto the desk made her jump. Victor's ice-blue eyes met hers, and for a moment she saw something flash across his face. Was it concern? Fear? But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by his usual mask of cold calculation. "Dmitri has betrayed us," Victor said, each word precise and sharp. "He's been feeding information to the Kazakov family for months." Isla's stomach dropped. Dmitri had been kind to her, always offering a reassuring smile when Victor's world became too overwhelming. He'd brought her coffee during long nights at the restaurant, told her stories about his family, made her feel less alone in this dangerous new reality. "But he wouldn't," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He's loyal to you. He's been with you for years." Victor's laugh was hollow, devoid of humor. "Loyalty can be bought, Isla. Everything has a price." He moved around the desk, his movements predatory. The Kazakovs offered him power, money, territory. And now... His hands gripped the back of her chair, caging her in. "Now they know about you." The weight of his words settled over her like a heavy blanket. Isla had known entering Victor's world was dangerous, but it had felt abstract until now. The betrayal made it real, immediate. Her hands shook as she set down the teacup. "What exactly did he tell them?" she asked, proud that her voice remained steady despite her racing heart. Victor's fingers brushed against her shoulder, a touch that was both possessive and protective. "Everything. Your schedule, your apartment, your family history." His grip tightened slightly. "They know you're important to me." The admission hung in the air between them. Important. The word seemed inadequate for whatever this thing was between them, this magnetic pull that kept drawing them together despite every rational thought screaming at her to run. Through the window, she watched as Victor's men moved with increased urgency across the courtyard. Below, the usual casual efficiency had been replaced by something more intense, more focused. The entire compound hummed with nervous energy. "Your security detail will be doubled," Victor continued, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You'll move into the east wing of the mansion temporarily. It's not safe for you to be alone right now." Isla stood abruptly, turning to face him. "I can't just abandon my life, my job, my apartment." "Your life?" Victor cut her off, stepping closer until she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Your life changed the moment I claimed you, Isla. The sooner you accept that, the better chance you have of surviving." A shiver ran down her spine at his words, but she held her ground. "Is that all this is about? Survival?" His hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing across her cheekbone in a gesture that was surprisingly gentle given the circumstances. The contrast between his tender touch and the violence she knew those hands were capable of made her head spin. "You know it's more than that," he murmured, his voice low and intense. His eyes searched hers, looking for something, understanding, perhaps, or acceptance. Before she could respond, the door burst open. One of Victor's men entered, face grim. "Sir, we have confirmation. The Kazakovs are moving." Victor's expression hardened instantly, the tender moment shattered. He turned to Isla, his grip on her arm firm but not painful. "Stay close to me," he demanded, authority and something else. Was it fear? Coloring his tone. "I'll protect you, but you must trust me." Isla's heart raced as she looked up at him, caught between her instinctive fear of what he represented and the undeniable pull she felt toward him. The betrayal had cracked the fragile trust she'd built, but as she met his intense gaze, she realized she had no choice but to put her faith in the very man who had turned her world upside down. The zip ties cut into Isla's wrists as she shifted against the metal chair. The warehouse air hung thick with dust and the metallic scent of rusted machinery. Her chest tightened with each breath, the stale air doing little to calm her racing heart. Through grimy windows high above, weak sunlight filtered in, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. 2 men stood guard near the entrance, their leather jackets marking them as members of the rival gang. They spoke in hushed tones, casting occasional glances in her direction. The larger one kept checking his phone, his agitation growing with each passing minute. "He's not answering," the man growled, shoving his phone back into his pocket. "The beast should have called by now." Isla's stomach churned at the mention of Victor's nickname. She'd heard whispers of why they called him that, stories that once made her skin crawl. Now, those same stories gave her a glimmer of hope. Victor wouldn't let this stand. She knew the violence he was capable of, had seen glimpses of it herself. Hours crawled by, marked only by the shifting shadows and the growing ache in her shoulders. The warehouse grew darker as evening approached, the temperature dropping. One of the guards flicked on industrial lights that buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows that made everything feel more sinister. A door slammed somewhere in the distance, followed by rapid footsteps. 3 more gang members burst into the space, their faces tight with tension. "They found Marco," one of them announced, his voice shaking. "Or what's left of him." The atmosphere in the warehouse shifted instantly. The guards exchanged worried looks, their earlier bravado crumbling. They knew what it meant. Victor was coming, and he was leaving a trail of bodies in his wake. Gunfire erupted outside, the sound echoing through the cavernous space. The guards raised their weapons, moving into defensive positions. Isla's heart hammered against her ribs as she heard car doors slamming, followed by shouts and more gunfire. The warehouse doors burst open with a thunderous crash. Victor's men poured in, their movements precise and lethal. Bullets flew, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. Isla ducked her head, trying to make herself as small as possible in her chair. Through the chaos, she caught glimpses of Victor. He moved like a shadow, each action deliberate and deadly. His face showed no emotion as he dispatched one guard after another, his gun barking in the dim light. The rival gang members fell one by one, their resistance crumbling in the face of Victor's ruthless assault. When the gunfire finally ceased, the warehouse fell into an eerie silence, broken only by the groans of the wounded. Victor strode toward her, his shoes clicking against the concrete. Blood spattered his expensive suit, but he didn't seem to notice or care. His eyes, usually so cold, burned with an intensity that made her breath catch. He knelt before her, pulling out a knife. Isla flinched instinctively, but his touch was gentle as he cut through the zip ties. The moment her hands were free, Victor pulled her into his arms, cradling her against his chest. His heartbeat thundered against her ear, betraying the emotion his face refused to show. "You're safe now," he muttered, his voice rough with barely contained rage and relief. His arms tightened around her, one hand threading through her hair as he held her close. Despite everything she'd just witnessed, despite the violence and death that surrounded them, Isla had never felt more protected. The warehouse still echoed with the sounds of Victor's men securing the area, but in his arms, those sounds seemed distant and unimportant. His familiar scent, expensive cologne mixed with gunpowder, surrounded her, grounding her in this moment of safety after hours of fear. She could feel him trembling slightly, his usual iron control fraying at the edges. This was the Victor that only she got to see. The man beneath the monster, capable of both terrible violence and tender protection. He'd torn through an entire gang to get to her, left a trail of bodies in his wake, and now held her as if she might shatter. The warehouse air grew thick with gunpowder and fear. Victor moved like a shadow through the dim space, his footsteps silent despite the chaos erupting around him. His men had surrounded the building, blocking every exit. There would be no escape for those who dared to take what was his. Aitla huddled in the corner of a makeshift office, her wrists raw from the rope they'd used to bind her. Through a crack in the door, she watched as Victor unleashed his rage. His usual calculated demeanor had transformed into something primal, something terrifying. The first gang member charged at Victor with a knife. In one fluid motion, Victor disarmed him, breaking his arm with a sickening crack. The man's scream echoed through the warehouse, cut short as Victor's fist connected with his throat. He dropped to the ground, gasping. "Where is your leader?" Victor's voice carried across the space, cold as ice. No one answered. His eyes, usually a stormy gray, had darkened to nearly black. "Very well." Two more men rushed him from different directions. Victor drew his gun with lightning speed, dispatching one with a clean shot to the chest. The other managed to graze Victor's cheek with a wild punch before finding himself thrown against a stack of crates. The wood splintered under the impact. Blood trickled down Victor's face, but he didn't seem to notice. His focus remained laser-sharp as he moved through the warehouse, eliminating threats with mechanical precision. Each shot, each strike, each broken bone was a message. This is what happens when you touch what belongs to Viktor Rurikov. From her hiding place, Isla could see the rival gang's resolve crumbling. Some tried to run, only to be caught by Victor's men waiting outside. Others dropped their weapons, begging for mercy. Victor showed none. The gang's leader finally emerged from the shadows, holding a gun to one of his own men's head. "Back off, Rurikov, or I start killing my own people." Victor's laugh was chilling. "You think I care about your men?" He advanced slowly, his presence filling the space between them. "You took something of mine. Now you pay the price." The leader's hand trembled. "She's just a waitress. We didn't know." "You knew exactly who she was." Victor cut him off. "You thought you could use her to get to me." His voice dropped lower, more dangerous. "That was your last mistake." The confrontation ended in seconds. Victor moved faster than Isla thought possible, disarming the leader and forcing him to his knees. The warehouse fell silent except for the man's ragged breathing. "Please," the leader whimpered. "I have money. I can pay." Victor pressed his gun to the man's temple. "Some debts can't be paid with money." The shot rang out, final and decisive. Turning to his men, Victor issued rapid commands in Russian. They moved through the warehouse, securing the scene, dealing with survivors. Victor himself walked straight to the office where Isla was hidden. The door creaked open. Isla flinched, but Victor's touch was gentle as he untied her bonds. His hands, still warm with violence, carefully examined her wrists for damage. The contrast was jarring, this tender attention from a man who had just orchestrated such brutality. "Did they hurt you?" His voice was rough with concern. Isla shook her head, unable to find words. She should have been terrified of what she'd witnessed, of what Victor was capable of. Instead, she felt oddly safe, protected. Victor helped her to her feet, steadying her when she swayed. His thumb brushed away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. Blood stained his expensive suit, but his touch remained clean and careful against her skin. They walked through the warehouse together, past the evidence of Victor's wrath. Each step reminded Isla that she was entering deeper into his world, a world of violence and power, but also of absolute loyalty and protection. At the warehouse entrance, Victor turned to face her. His eyes had softened, the darkness of violence receding to reveal something else entirely, something that made Isla's heart skip. "You're mine, forever," he said, the words both a promise and a declaration. The dim light of Victor's study cast long shadows across his face, as he stood by the window, his shoulders tense with an emotion Isla had never seen in him before. The events of the past few hours, the violence, the blood, the revenge, still hung heavy in the air between them. But something else lingered too, something that made her heart race for entirely different reasons. "I've never felt fear like this before," Victor said, his voice barely above a whisper. His fingers traced patterns on the glass, leaving ghostly marks. "When they took you." He paused, his jaw clenching. "I thought I'd lost everything again." Isla took a hesitant step toward him, drawn by the vulnerability in his voice. Her dress still bore traces of dirt from the warehouse, but she hardly noticed. "Victor?" He turned to face her, his eyes dark with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I've built my empire on control, on never showing weakness." His hands clenched into fists at his sides. "But you make me weak, Isla, and for the first time in my life, I don't want to fight it." The confession hung between them, raw and honest. Isla's heart thundered in her chest as Victor crossed the room to her, his movements slow, deliberate. When he reached her, his hand came up to cup her face, his touch gentler than she'd ever felt from him. "I tried to own you," he admitted, his thumb brushing her cheek, "to control you like everything else in my world. But you've owned me since that first night in the restaurant. I just didn't know it then." Isla leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly. When she opened them again, she saw the struggle in Victor's face, the battle between the ruthless mafia boss and the man who was laying his heart bare before her. "I watched you kill those men today," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I should be terrified of you." "But you're not," he stated, his eyes searching hers. "No," she admitted. "I'm terrified of how much I need you, how much I—" She swallowed hard, gathering her courage. "How much I love you." Victor's breath caught, his hand stilling on her face. For a moment he looked almost vulnerable, almost human. Then he pulled her closer, his forehead resting against hers. "Say it again," he demanded softly. "I love you," she repeated, stronger this time. "God help me, but I do." "I've loved you since you first told me no," he confessed, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "You were the first person who dared to stand up to me, to see past the monster everyone else sees." His other hand came up to frame her face. "I love you, Isla Sullivan, with everything I am, everything I have. The good and the bad, the light and the dark, it's all yours." Tears pricked at Isla's eyes as she reached up to touch his face, tracing the strong line of his jaw. This was Victor as she'd never seen him. Open, vulnerable, completely bare before her. The walls they'd both built, the defenses they'd maintained, crumbled away like dust. His lips found hers, but this kiss was different from all the others they'd shared. Gone was the desperate need to possess, to dominate. Instead, there was tenderness, a gentle exploration that spoke of something deeper than desire. His hands threaded through her hair as he deepened the kiss, pouring all his unspoken feelings into the connection between them. Isla melted into him, her arms wrapping around his neck as she returned the kiss with equal fervor. She could taste the truth of his words on his lips, feel the depth of his love in the way he held her like she was something precious rather than something owned. When they finally broke apart, Victor's eyes were soft, filled with an emotion she'd never seen in them before. Love, pure and unguarded, shone in their depths, transforming his entire face. The beast was gone, replaced by a man who had finally found his heart again. Victor paced in his study, his footsteps heavy against the hardwood floor. The morning light filtered through bulletproof windows, casting long shadows across his tense features. Reports of dissent within his ranks lay scattered across his desk, whispers of betrayal from those who thought him weak for protecting a waitress. Isla watched him from the leather armchair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The events of the past few days had left dark circles under her eyes, but she refused to look away from the dangerous man before her. The rival gang's attack had wounded several of Victor's most loyal men, and the aftermath hung heavy in the air. "They think I've lost my edge," Victor growled, stopping to pour himself a glass of vodka. His knuckles were still bruised from yesterday's confrontation. "That you've made me soft." Isla's throat tightened. "Maybe I should—" "Don't." Victor's voice cut through the air like a blade. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, looming over her chair. "Don't you dare suggest leaving." His hand reached out, fingers grazing her cheek with surprising gentleness. The contrast between his touch and his fierce expression made her heart skip. She'd seen both sides of him now, the ruthless mafia boss who could order deaths without blinking, and the man who held her like she was precious. "Your own men are questioning you because of me," Isla whispered, even as she leaned into his touch. "The rival gang nearly destroyed everything you've built." Victor's eyes darkened. Let them question. Let them doubt. He pulled her to her feet, his grip firm but never hurting. "Do you know what I see when I look at them? Replaceable pieces on a board. But you—" His other hand slid into her hair, tilting her face up. "You're irreplaceable." A commotion outside the study drew their attention. Angry voices echoed through the hallway, his captains arguing about territory losses, about the power vacuum created by the rival gang's attack. Victor's empire was bleeding, and everyone knew it. "Sir," one of his men burst through the door, freezing when he saw Isla in Victor's arms. "The Italians are moving in on the west side. They're saying I'm distracted?" Victor's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. He didn't release Isla. If anything, his hold tightened. "That I've lost my grip?" The man swallowed hard, nodding. Victor's laugh was cold enough to freeze blood. "Then perhaps it's time to remind everyone exactly who I am." He turned to Isla, his expression softening for just a moment. "And why I protect what's mine." Isla felt the shift in the air, saw the deadly intent in his eyes. This was the side of him that earned him the name Beast, the ruthless killer who built an empire on blood and fear. But instead of terror, she felt something else. Understanding. "Your enemies think I'm your weakness," she said quietly, reaching up to touch his face. "They don't understand that love doesn't make you weak." Victor went still under her touch, his eyes widening slightly. It was the first time either of them had come close to naming this thing between them. The word love hung in the air, dangerous and beautiful all at once. "No," he agreed, his voice rough. "They don't understand that protecting you gives me something worth fighting for, worth killing for." The man at the door shifted uncomfortably, but Victor ignored him. His focus was entirely on Isla, on the way she fit against him, on the strength he saw beneath her soft exterior. She'd survived his world, adapted to it, never losing herself in the process. "I won't let them tear us apart," Victor promised, his words carrying the weight of an oath. His empire might be shaken, but his resolve was unbreakable. "Anyone who tries will learn why they call me the Beast." Isla nodded, understanding the gravity of the moment. She was choosing this, choosing him, choosing this dangerous life. The rival gang's attack hadn't driven her away. It had shown her exactly where she belonged. Victor's thumb traced her bottom lip, his touch possessive yet tender. "You're mine now," he murmured, "and I will burn anyone who dares to come between us." The marble floors of Victor's mansion echoed with heavy footsteps as his men dragged in 3 bound figures. Isla stood in the shadows of his office doorway, her heart hammering against her ribs. She'd never seen Victor like this. His usual cold control had given way to something darker, more primal. "You thought you could betray me?" Victor's voice cut through the tense silence. He circled the kneeling men like a predator, his movements fluid and dangerous. "That you could sell information to my enemies and I wouldn't find out?" One of the men, Marcus, lifted his chin defiantly. "Your weakness for the girl made you soft. The others saw it too." Isla's breath caught in her throat. Victor stopped his pacing, his shoulders tensing. The room seemed to drop several degrees. "Soft?" Victor's laugh was hollow, devoid of warmth. He reached for his gun, the metal gleaming under the chandelier's light. "Let me show you how soft I've become." "Victor," Isla whispered, but she knew she couldn't stop what was coming. This was his world, raw and violent, and sometimes necessary. The first shot rang out, making Isla flinch. Marcus crumpled to the floor, his defiant expression frozen in death. The other 2 traitors began to struggle against their bonds, panic setting in. "Your deaths won't be quick," Victor said, his voice eerily calm. "You'll serve as an example to anyone else who thinks they can challenge me." Outside, the sound of gunfire erupted. Victor's head snapped toward the window. One of his loyal men burst through the door, blood streaming from a cut above his eye. "Sir, they're here. The rival family. They're attacking from all sides." Victor's expression hardened. He turned to Isla, crossing the room in 3 long strides. His hands gripped her shoulders, gentle despite the violence surrounding them. "Stay here. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but me." His eyes searched hers, a flash of concern breaking through his mask of fury. Isla grabbed his wrist before he could pull away. "Be careful," she whispered. The ghost of a smile touched his lips before he turned, barking orders to his men. The mansion erupted into chaos, shouts and gunfire echoing through every corridor. Isla locked herself in the office as instructed, her hands trembling as she crouched behind Victor's heavy desk. Through the window, she could see figures moving in the darkness, exchanging gunfire. Victor's silhouette was unmistakable as he moved with lethal precision, taking down enemies one by one. His reputation, as the beast wasn't just for show, he was ruthless, efficient, unstoppable. The firefight seemed to last forever. Isla's ears rang with the constant barrage of bullets and shouting. She watched as Victor's men gained the upper hand, pushing back the attackers. The 2 remaining traitors had been dealt with, their bodies lying cold on the marble floor beside her. When the gunfire finally died down, an eerie silence fell over the mansion. Isla's breath came in short gasps as she waited, straining to hear any sign of Victor. The door handle rattled and she tensed. "Isla." Victor's voice, rough but alive. "Open the door." She scrambled to her feet, fumbling with the lock. When the door swung open, she had to stifle a gasp. Victor stood before her, his suit splattered with blood, a cut running down his cheek. But his eyes were alive with a fierce triumph. He stepped into the room, pulling her against his chest. His heart thundered beneath her ear, the only sign of exertion from the battle he'd just won. Isla breathed in his scent, gunpowder mixed with his expensive cologne, relief flooding through her. "It's done," he murmured into her hair. "The traitors, the rival family, they're all gone." Isla pulled back enough to look up at him. "Your empire can be rebuilt." His hand cupped her cheek, thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "What matters is that you're safe, that you're still here." His empire might be shaken, his ranks thinned, but as Victor held her close, his voice softened with those words, Isla knew this was where she belonged. In this dangerous world of his, she'd found something real, something worth fighting for. "It's just you and me now," he said softly, his eyes filled with determination. Victor stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, his shoulders rigid with tension as he surveyed his domain. The city sprawled before him, a maze of lights and shadows that belonged to him. Behind him, Isla watched his reflection in the glass, noting how even now, after everything, he maintained that predatory stillness that had first drawn her to him. "Come here," he commanded softly, not turning around. Isla moved to his side, her heels clicking against the marble floor. The sound echoed in the vast space, reminding her of how far she'd come from her days as a waitress. Victor's arm slipped around her waist, pulling her against him with that familiar possessiveness that now brought comfort rather than fear. "Look at it all," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. "Everything the light touches is ours now." Isla leaned into him, remembering the chaos of the past few days, the betrayal, the violence, the blood that had been spilled to secure their future. The memory of gunfire still rang in her ears, the image of Victor standing over his enemies still fresh in her mind. But instead of horror, she felt only security. "Your empire is different now," she said softly, placing her hand over his where it rested on her hip. Victor's lips curved into a rare smile. "Our empire," he corrected. "You've changed everything, Moya Lubov." His grip tightened momentarily. The old ways died with the traitors. Below them, cars moved like streams of light through the streets. Isla could see the restaurant where it all began, now under their protection. Victor had insisted on buying it, making it the first legitimate business in their new venture together. It was her domain now, the beginning of a chain she would build. "The Hell's Angels sent their regards," Victor mentioned, his tone casual but laden with meaning. "They want to negotiate new terms." Isla turned in his arms, facing him. His eyes, usually so cold, held warmth when they looked at her. "And what did you tell them?" "That my wife will handle the negotiations." His hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing over her cheekbone. "You've proven yourself more than capable of dealing with such matters." The pride in his voice made her heart swell. She had indeed come into her own, learning to navigate the dangerous waters of Victor's world with a grace that surprised even him. The shy waitress was gone, replaced by a woman who could stand beside the beast as an equal. "The restaurant's numbers are up," she said, running her hands up his chest, "and the new security measures are working perfectly. No one dares cause trouble now." Victor's laugh was dark and pleased. "They know better than to cross us. The examples we made were quite effective." Isla remembered the bodies, the way Victor had systematically destroyed anyone who had dared to harm her. It should have horrified her, but instead she felt protected, cherished in a way she'd never known before. "The rebuilding starts tomorrow," she reminded him, thinking of the plans they'd made together. New businesses, legitimate fronts, a careful balance of their dark world with the light. "Are you ready? With you by my side?" Victor pulled her closer, his forehead resting against hers. "I'm ready for anything." The city continued to pulse below them, unaware of the changes happening in its underworld. Victor had transformed his empire from one built purely on violence to something more sustainable, more intricate. And Isla had been the catalyst, her influence softening his edges while sharpening her own. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper. choosing this life? Choosing me? Isla looked up at him, at the man who had forced his way into her life and changed everything. The monster who had shown her his heart, the beast who killed for her and loved her with equal passion. Never, she answered truthfully. This is where I belong. The city stretched out before them like a blanket of stars, its lights twinkling in the velvet darkness. Victor's hand rested possessively on the small of Isla's back as they stood on the rooftop of his mansion, the cool night air wrapping around them. The chaos of the past weeks seemed distant now, though its echoes still lingered in the fresh bruises on Victor's knuckles and the slight tremor in Isla's hands. Do you remember the first time I saw you? Victor's voice was low, intimate. His fingers traced slow circles on her back, each touch sending shivers through her body. That quiet little waitress, trying so hard to be invisible? Isla leaned into his touch, her heart racing at the memory. You terrified me, she admitted, a small smile playing on her lips. I thought my life was over when you dragged me into that bathroom. Victor's chest rumbled with a dark chuckle. Your life wasn't over. It was just beginning. He turned her to face him, his steel-gray eyes intense in the moonlight. Everything I've done since that moment has been to keep you safe, to make you mine. The wind picked up, carrying with it the distant sounds of the city below. Isla shivered, and Victor immediately pulled her closer, enveloping her in his warmth. His protective instincts never wavered, not even in these quiet moments. I know what I am, he continued, his voice taking on an edge of darkness. I'm not a good man, Isla. The things I've done... He paused, his jaw tightening. But with you, I want to be better. Not good, never that, but better. Isla reached up, her fingers tracing the scar that ran along his jawline. She'd learned its story now, understood the violence that had shaped him. You don't need to change for me, Victor. I fell in love with who you are, not who you could be. His grip tightened at her words, possessive and tender all at once. I've lost everything I've ever loved, he said, his voice rough with emotion. My wife, my family, pieces of myself I'll never get back. But you... He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs stroking her cheeks. You brought something back to life in me, something I thought died years ago. The city lights reflected in his eyes, making them shimmer with an almost supernatural intensity. I promise you this, my Isla. No one will ever hurt you again. Anyone who tries... His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. They won't live long enough to regret it. Isla knew this wasn't an idle threat. She'd seen what Victor was capable of, the destruction he could unleash when someone threatened what was his. But instead of fear, she felt security wash over her. In his dangerous world, his protection was the safest place she could be. The restaurant, she said softly, thinking of her old workplace. It seems like another lifetime ago. Victor's lips curved into a slight smile. You can have any restaurant you want now, 10 of them, a whole chain if you desire. His fingers tangled in her hair. Everything I have is yours. I just want you, Isla replied, pressing closer to him. Everything else, it doesn't matter. He studied her face for a long moment, as if memorizing every detail. The possessiveness in his gaze made her breath catch. You have me. All of me. The monster. And the man. His voice grew fierce. I'll burn this whole city to the ground if it means keeping you safe. The wind picked up again, carrying with it the promise of rain. But neither of them moved to go inside. This moment, this connection between them felt too precious to break. Isla met his gaze, seeing in his eyes all the darkness and light that made him who he was. Despite everything, the violence, the danger, the fear, they had found something real, something powerful. She smiled up at him, her heart full of love for this complicated, dangerous man who had claimed her so completely. "Together, forever," she whispered, the words carrying all the weight of a vow. The city lights twinkled below like scattered diamonds, a stark contrast to the darkness that had brought Victor and Isla to this moment. They stood on the rooftop of his mansion, the cool night air wrapping around them like a silk shawl. Victor's hand rested possessively on the small of Isla's back, his touch both protective and gentle, a side of him only she got to see. "Everything you see belongs to us now," Victor said, his accent thicker in the quiet moment. His empire stretched across the glittering skyline, every building and shadow holding whispers of his influence. "But nothing matters more than you." Isla leaned into his warmth, remembering how far they'd come from that first terrifying encounter in the restaurant bathroom. The shy waitress she'd been seemed like a stranger now. In her place stood a woman who had learned to embrace both the light and dark sides of love. "I never thought I'd end up here," she admitted, her voice soft but steady. "I was so scared of you at first." Victor's chest rumbled with a low chuckle. "As you should have been." His fingers traced patterns on her back. "I am still the monster they fear, Mishka. But for you—" He turned her to face him, his ice-blue eyes softening as they met hers. "For you, I am simply a man." The rooftop garden around them rustled in the breeze, the carefully maintained roses and vines creating a paradise above the cruel world below. Victor had transformed this space for her, knowing she needed somewhere beautiful to escape the harsh realities of their life. "Your enemies are gone," Isla said, reaching up to touch his face. The stubble beneath her fingers was familiar now, comfortable. "But there will always be more, won't there?" "Da," he agreed, turning to kiss her palm. "But they will never touch you. I have made sure of that." His voice carried the weight of his promise, and the bodies that had paved the way to keep it. Isla thought about the past few months, how Victor had systematically eliminated every threat to their happiness. He'd been brutal, efficient, and completely unapologetic. Yet each night, he'd return to her with gentle hands and tender words, washing away the blood before taking her in his arms. "The restaurant is almost ready," she said, changing the subject. Victor had bought her dream for her, a high-end establishment where she could finally be in charge. It was his wedding gift to her, though they hadn't set a date yet. "You will make it magnificent," he said with absolute certainty. "Everything you touch becomes beautiful." His hand slid up to cup the back of her neck, possessive yet tender. "Even me." Isla smiled, remembering how the staff had whispered that Victor was different now, still deadly, still feared, but no longer the cold machine he'd been before her. She had given him back his humanity, one piece at a time. "I love you," she whispered, the words still new enough to make her heart skip. "Even when you terrify everyone else, even when you have to be the beast." Victor pulled her closer, his body shielding her from the wind. "You are the only one who sees all of me," he said. "The monster and the man, and you choose to stay." The city stretched endlessly before them, a kingdom they now ruled together. Isla knew there would always be darkness in their world. It was the nature of Victor's empire. But she had found her place within it, learning to balance the violence with love, the fear with hope. "We've fought so hard to be here," she said, remembering all the battles, both physical and emotional, that had led to this moment. "And I would fight 1,000 more," Victor promised, his voice carrying that dangerous edge she'd come to associate with his absolute devotion. You are mine, Isla. My heart, my queen, my everything. They stood together, watching their domain spread out before them. The night wrapped around them like a cloak, comfortable now rather than threatening. They had carved out their own version of happiness, found their own way to love amid the chaos of Victor's world. The setting sun painted the mansion's marble floors in shades of amber and gold, casting long shadows across the pristine surfaces as Victor and Isla walked through their sprawling home. His hand rested possessively on the small of her back, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. The warmth of his touch seeped through the silk of her dress, a constant reminder of his presence, his protection. Isla's fingertips traced the cool surface of the mahogany walls as they passed, still amazed at how this place had become her home. The same halls that once intimidated her now felt like a sanctuary. Even the armed guards positioned discreetly throughout the mansion had become a familiar sight, their presence a reminder of the world they lived in, a world of power, danger, and unbreakable bonds. "What are you thinking about?" Victor's deep voice rumbled beside her, his accent thicker in these private moments when he didn't need to maintain his carefully controlled facade. Isla turned to face him, taking in his strong features softened by the evening light. The man who had once terrified her now held her heart completely. "About how different everything is now," she admitted, her voice soft but sure. "How this place used to feel like a prison. And now... Victor's steel-blue eyes fixed on her, intense and searching as always. "Now it's home." The words came easily, naturally, because they were true. The luxury that surrounded them wasn't what made it home. It was the man beside her, the one who had fought for her, killed for her, and ultimately opened his heart to her. Victor's lips curved into that rare smile he reserved only for her. His hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing across her cheekbone with a gentleness that would shock those who knew him only as the Beast. "You've changed everything," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "My world was darkness before you." They paused by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city below. The lights were beginning to twinkle in the growing darkness, a reminder of the empire that stretched out before them. Victor's empire. Their empire now. Isla had learned to navigate this dangerous world, to stand beside him not just as his woman, but as his equal partner. "The reports from the docks came in," Victor said, his arm sliding around her waist. "Everything is secure. The last of the resistance has been dealt with." There was an edge to his voice, a reminder that while he might be gentle with her, he was still the ruthless leader who commanded fear and respect in equal measure. Isla nodded, no longer flinching at the implications of his words. She had accepted this part of him, understanding that his brutality was what kept them safe, what maintained the order in their world. "And the new arrangements with the Chinese?" "Signed and sealed," he replied, pride evident in his tone. "You were right about approaching them differently. Your insight probably prevented an unnecessary war." She smiled, remembering the tense negotiations where her subtle suggestions had helped smooth over potential conflicts. She had found her own way to contribute to their world, using her understanding of people to help navigate the complex politics of their underground empire. The last rays of sunlight disappeared beyond the horizon, leaving them in the soft glow of the mansion's lighting. Victor turned her in his arms, his powerful frame enveloping her smaller one. His presence was overwhelming as always, but now it brought comfort rather than fear. His hands trailed up her arms, leaving goosebumps in their wake. One hand tangled in her hair while the other settled at the small of her back, pulling her closer. The heat between them was immediate and familiar, a constant undercurrent in their relationship that had never diminished. Victor leaned down, his lips brushing against her ear. "You're mine, forever," he whispered, his voice full of possession and promise. Isla smiled, tilting her head to meet his intense gaze. She had found her place in his dark world, and she wouldn't have it any other way. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story, and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.